world, Leader McConnell moved to table his own bill so Republicans could then vote against tabling it. That's what the Republican majority thinks passes for a serious attempt at COVID relief bill in this Republican Senate when people are suffering so badly. Games when people are suffering. The truth is the Republican leader needed that vote to fail, because if the Senate actually proceeded to a real bill, it might mess up the timing of the Republican plan to confirm Judge Barrett to the Supreme Court. Now think of that for a moment. The Republican majority sets up a fake vote on COVID relief because if, God forbid, the Senate actually considered a real bill to do something real about this overwhelming COVID crisis, it might delay their Supreme Court nominee that they are rushing through in a process that can only be declared as abusive to the Senate. That's all the American people need to know about priorities on the other side of the aisle. Rush a nominee through whose views are way to the right of the American people and ignore, avoid, play games with getting COVID relief, which is the #1 thing the American people want, not a Supreme Court nominee who is so far away from their views. While the country is hurting, while millions of Americans are sick and dying, while workers lose their jobs, businesses close their doors, Republican senators are playing political stunts with vitally needed economic relief. And the games continue today. Once again, the Republican majority will bring up a bill designed to fail, their partisan, emaciated COVID relief bill, so-called COVID relief bill. The bill we're voting on today has already failed in the Senate, didn't get a Democratic vote, and we already know it lacks the votes. And why? Because it leaves so many Americans behind. Renters and homeowners are left behind. There's no relief for them. Americans who've lost jobs through no fault of their own are left behind. Americans who rely on critical public service by their state and local governments are left behind. Small businesses in communities of color and in some of the hardest hit industries, our restaurants, our concert venues, theaters, nonprofits, local news, receive no dedicated assistance. The Republican proposal on COVID doesn't even devote enough resources to testing and tracing, despite a spike in cases and the harrowing prospect of a second wave of the virus sweeping across America. It's laden with poison pills that our Republican colleagues know Democrats would never support. That's not a real attempt to legislate and get something done. What's in there? A giant corporate immunity provision to shield corporations from liability if they put their workers in dangerous COVID-related situations. A tax provision to benefit wealthy families who send their kids to private schools while shortchanging middle-class families in public schools. There's no reason for our Republicans' colleagues to insist on a corporate liability shield and a provision to injure public schools in a COVID relief bill. No reason. They know it's objectionable. They know it's partisan. They know it's an anchor around the minimal bill they have, enough to sink it. There's no reason to include these poison pills in legislation that they know needs bipartisan support to pass, because 20 Republicans have said they don't want to vote for any money. So they know they need Democrats, but they put things in the bill that they know Democrats will oppose and lead to the bill's demise. This minimal bill. So what's the logic here? Well, there is a perverse logic if the Republican leader wants to make sure that the bill fails. And that's sure what it looks like. It's clear why Leader McConnell is forced to do these stunts. A good portion of his caucus opposes more relief to the American people. Yesterday, the Republican whip, the member in charge of counting Republican votes, said, quote, "I think we're going to have a hard time finding 13 Republican votes for anything." 13 out of 52, 53. One Republican member proudly vowed, quote, "not to vote for another dime." People are being kicked out of their homes. Children are starving. There's no testing and tracing that meets the needs. Schools can't open, and not another dime. Let America suffer. So our right-wing ideology, saying that we shouldn't make well-to-do people pay taxes, that's what their last tax cut bill did, can prevail over the needs of America and the American people. So it's not Democrats who are blocking a real relief bill. We know that. Everyone knows that. Speaker Pelosi is still trying her best with the White House to get a deal. We've already offered to meet Republicans halfway. The biggest obstacle to another relief bill from the very beginning has been Senate Republicans and Leader McConnell. And as if we needed any more proof, it was pretty obvious before. It was reported in multiple news outlets, confirmed by 4 senators who were at the meeting, that Leader McConnell warned the White House against making another deal on another stimulus bill before the election. Let me repeat that. Leader McConnell, while he was coming to the floor and railing against Democratic obstruction, was behind the scenes warning the White House against striking a bipartisan deal on COVID relief. Who does he think he can fool? Not the American people. Ask them. They know who's to blame. They know Democrats and up and down the line are for relief, and Republicans are opposing it. And I'll tell you one thing. The American people are sick and tired of these political stunts. They're sick and tired of politicians who would rather have it appear that they are working than do actual work. This shouldn't be so hard. We all know how to pass bills in the Senate with bipartisan buy-in and bipartisan support. We did it in the CARES bill back in March. But ever since that bill passed, this Senate Republican majority has gone totally partisan every step of the way, even on an issue as important to the country as relief from this evil pandemic. Now on the Supreme Court. The Republican leader has announced that the Senate will vote on Judge Amy Coney Barrett to be a Supreme Court justice next Monday, capping what will be the most rushed, most partisan, and least legitimate process in the entire history of Supreme Court nominations. Leader McConnell continues to defile the Senate more than any other senator has done in a very long time. Let us hope that Leader McConnell hasn't ruined the Senate for good with this nasty 180-degree turn, holding up Merrick Garland, and rushing this judge through while people are online at the polling places. The idea, let's wait for the next election, was total hypocrisy. Total hypocrisy. The United States Senate has never considered a Supreme Court justice this close to a national presidential election. I doubt it ever will again. I don't think we'll ever have the combination of Donald Trump and Leader McConnell, who so don't care about what they said in the past, McConnell anyway, who so don't care about trying to pick a justice who will look at the law as opposed to ideological views. Hope so. Hope it doesn't happen again. Pray it doesn't happen again. Just 4 years ago, we all know the Republican leader, the former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the current chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and nearly every single Republican member argued that President Obama's nominee didn't deserve a hearing or a vote on the floor of the Senate because there was a national election 8 months away. Mere hours after the passing of Justice Scalia, Leader McConnell said the American people deserve a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. Not if one party or another party controlled the presidency or the Senate. Absolute. The American people deserve a voice. That was 8 months from an election. Leader McConnell confirmed yesterday that the vote to confirm President Trump's nominee to the Supreme Court will take place 8 days before an election. Senate Republicans could wait 8 months to give the American people a voice in selecting a Supreme Court justice. Now they can't wait 8 days. I am sure that if they had to, the Republican majority would confirm a Supreme Court justice 8 minutes before Election Day. Is it no wonder that Democrats are so angry? Is it no wonder that the American people are tearing their hair out when they have said they want to wait till the next election, when that's only fair, that's only democratic, small d? The hypocrisy is towering and enormous. And as I said, Leader McConnell could destroy this chamber for a very long time. Why is this happening? Well, this is part of a decade-long effort to shift the courts to the far right, so that the far right, which has so many Republicans in their grasp, can accomplish through the judiciary what they could never accomplish through the Congress. Senate Republicans failed to repeal the Affordable Care Act. We know that happened right here. So President Trump and Republicans' Attorney General are suing to eliminate the law in court. Senate Republicans don't dare put repeal of Roe v. Wade on the floor of the Senate. They know it would fail. But they try to appoint justices who are dedicated to repealing that vital right of a woman to choose and to control her own body. This is just an amazing moment. One of Coney Barrett's very first cases would be to hear arguments against the Affordable Care Act, the very act that this chamber rejected repeal of. Republicans, as I said, could never repeal a woman's right to choose in Congress. They don't even dare bring it to the floor. The far right has never had a majority on the court to limit Roe or Griswold, but if Judge Barrett becomes Justice Barrett, it very well might. Women of America, watch out. Watch out. I'll remind my colleagues and the American people, when President Trump was asked about Roe v. Wade during his final debate against Hillary Clinton, he said, quote, "If we put another 2 or 3 justices on the court, the repeal of Roe v. Wade will happen automatically." Is that what this Republican majority stands for? If they do, announce it to the American people. Don't hide behind this idea that justices are calling balls and strikes, that they will obey precedent. Don't hide behind that, because we know what's happening here. The American people should make no mistake. Their fundamental rights are on the line. The right to affordable health care, to make their own medical decisions, to join a union, vote without impediments, the right to marry who they love. That's what this is all about. Now, Leader McConnell has strained credulity to argue that ramming a Supreme Court justice through the Senate while American voters wait in line to cast their ballots is completely normal. Nothing to see here, he says. Who believes him? I don't think a single Republican on that side believes him. But they know what's going on. This is not the Senate, as he says, performing its historic function. It's a fiction. There is no precedent in history for the Senate for what the Republicans are doing. Abraham Lincoln, our great hero, great Republican, rejected nominating somebody for the Supreme Court so close to an election. So Republicans, at the very least, ought to go on record and admit this is an extraordinary breach of precedent, of comity, of fairness, of decency, of honor, of truth, of consistency. So in a short time, I will make a point of order that the Senate should not consider a nomination to the Supreme Court this close to a presidential election. Every senator will vote on whether a nomination this close to an election shall be in order. It will confirm to the American people what we all know to be true, that the Republican majority has absolutely no intention of honoring the supposed principle it so vehemently argued in 2016. That they won't follow history, that they won't follow precedent, that they won't follow norms and traditions of the Senate, that they won't even follow their own standards. That is the indelible mark on this Senate majority. That here in Leader McConnell's Senate, it's the rule of because we can, might makes right. Because we can, as Senator Whitehouse put it. all to confirm a far-right justice on the court who would rip away health care from tens of millions of Americans in the middle of a pandemic. We'll see how my Republican colleagues vote. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, for months now, Democrat leaders have held additional COVID relief hostage. Instead of working with Republicans to arrive at a compromise bill that both parties can support and that can make it through both houses of Congress, Democrats have insisted that it's their way or the highway. Either Republicans agree to a bloated, multi-trillion-dollar piece of legislation filled with non-coronavirus-related measures and far-left liberal wish list items, a bill that would never make it through both houses of Congress, or Americans get no relief. That's basically the choice the Democrats have left the American people. Mr. President, it goes without saying that this is not the attitude of a party that really wants to get help to Americans. This is the attitude of a party that wants to use this crisis for political purposes. Democrats figure that they win either way. Either they use this crisis to force through a bunch of liberal priorities not related to COVID, or they blame Republicans for the lack of a bill. Completely absent from their calculations is any sense of what their intransigence is costing the American people. If Democrats had actually been willing to compromise with Republicans to reach consensus legislation, we could have had a new COVID relief bill months ago. Americans could be enjoying additional relief right now. Republicans have made it clear since the summer that we were willing to compromise with Democrats on a new bill. All we asked was the Democrats come to the aisle, I should say come to the table, with a reasonable proposal that could actually make it through both houses of Congress. But Democrats haven't been interested. Oh, sure, Speaker Pelosi has supposedly been working on an agreement with the White House for months. We constantly hear from the Speaker that a deal is getting closer, only to discover the next day that a deal isn't really close at all. Well, Mr. President, let me tell you something. If you are the Speaker of the House and you really want to arrive at a compromise, it doesn't take you 3 months. It probably even doesn't take you 3 weeks. Mr. President, Democrats have to know very well that there is no way for them to get a bill containing everything they want through both houses of Congress. But Democrats could get some of what they want. And isn't something better than nothing? Even if Democrats were right about the need for every penny of spending that they're calling for, wouldn't it be better to get some of that spending passed than to have nothing? To Democrats, apparently the answer is no. Mr. President, in just a few minutes, the Senate will be voting on Republican coronavirus legislation. Our bill would provide more money for the hardest hit small businesses, more healthcare resources to fight the virus, and money to help schools reopen and operate safely. Priorities that all of us, Democrats and Republicans, should be able to agree on. In theory, I'm pretty sure we do agree on them. Yet all signs suggest that Democrats will filibuster this coronavirus relief legislation for the second time. Even though passing this bill would get more money into the hands of small businesses and schools, even though this bill would provide additional funding for COVID testing and treatment. Nevertheless, once again, Democrats will choose nothing over something. Once again, Democrats will decide that if they can't get everything they want, it's better for Americans not to have anything. Mr. President, I hope whatever perceived political gains Democrats are getting from their refusal to negotiate are worth denying help to the American people. In a few minutes, Republicans will cast their votes in favor of COVID relief. And I invite rank and file Democrats to reject their leader's obstruction and join us on that vote. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, late last night, the news flash was Senator McConnell, Republican leader of the United States Senate, opposes COVID-19 relief bill and informs the White House. Supposedly, it was a statement made by Senator McConnell at his Republican lunch yesterday, and it was later confirmed by 4 Republican senators who attended that is what occurred. Finally, it becomes public, one of the things that has been suspected for a long time on this side of the aisle. You see, most of us have been paying close attention to these speeches by Senator McConnell to try to gauge his interest in really coming back to help the American people. We remember on March 26th when 96 to nothing, the Senate voted for COVID relief in what was known as the CARES Act. It was a bipartisan measure responding to a national pandemic that was just starting to surface and an economy that was just starting to collapse. Many people thought at the time that that would be the end of our journey, that we would do what's necessary and put it behind us. And so the unemployment assistance, for example, ended on July 31st of this year. The PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, ended in the middle of August. We were wrong. The pandemic got dramatically worse, and the economy slumped even further. Millions more were out of work. Thousands were dying. More were infected. And we still are in a terrible battle now against this deadly virus. So the obvious solution was for Congress to come back and to help again. The first measure was good and I think helpful, but it wasn't enough. We needed more. So Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic Speaker of the House, 5 months ago in May, passed a COVID relief bill to follow on from the original bill. She sent it over to Senator McConnell 5 months ago, and he did nothing. What he said was, I want to see if I feel a sense of urgency about the need for this bill. A sense of urgency. Well, today, 220,000 Americans have died. Americans are dying at a pace from this coronavirus that is unimaginable. Do you understand that the death rate from COVID in America is 2.5 times the death rate in Canada? Do we realize that the infection rate from COVID-19 in the United States is 5 times what it is in Canada or Germany? Do we understand that with 4.5% of the world's population, the United States sadly leads the way in COVID-19 deaths, with 20% of all of the people who've died on Earth from COVID-19 from the United States of America? The efforts to deal with COVID-19 have failed, and the American people know it. They're tired of this way of living with these masks, but they know if they don't, they risk their health and the safety of others. They want this economy to come back to life. They want the kids to go back to school. But we can't move forward unless we have leadership, number one, and that's what an election is all about, a plan, number two, and the resources to implement it. Well, what are the resources that Senator McConnell believes are necessary to deal with this? When it comes to testing, $16 billion for the nation, $16 billion. We are currently testing 1 million people a day across the United States. We should be testing 14 million people a day if we're serious about contact tracing, if we're serious about reopening the economy. And so the senator from Kentucky comes to the floor this morning and talks about the obstructionism of Nancy Pelosi. Obstructionism? 5 months ago, she passed a COVID relief bill and sent it to his desk, and he never once brought it to the floor for a debate or a vote, not once. He mocks it, criticizes it day after day after day, but he's afraid of a vote on the floor of the United States Senate. So he comes up with an elaborate procedural scheme, which we'll see in just a few minutes here, that basically wants to put together his package for COVID relief. But his package is missing so many key elements that we know it will not respond to this national crisis. It's the old story of a man 30 feet from shore drowning, and someone stands by the shore and tosses him a 5-foot rope. It doesn't work. It doesn't reach. It doesn't save him. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has told us that if we don't do something, there will be a tragic result with the American economy. If we pass a bill of the magnitude suggested by Speaker Pelosi, we have a chance of recovering by the end of 2021. If we don't, the chairman of the Federal Reserve warns us, and other economists as well, that we're going to slump into an even worse recession, even more unemployment, even more businesses failing. That appears to be what Senator McConnell is prepared to accept, but we're not. Those of us who were sent here to deal with the real problems and challenges for Americans realize we need more than just an effort that throws that 5-foot rope to a man drowning 30 feet from shore. That is the McConnell approach. As we take a look at the elements that are missing in the McConnell approach, they are lengthy. Virtually every state and local government in the nation has seen a downturn in revenue because the economy contracting. We want to help these state and local governments survive, to be able to ignore, or I should say overcome, the need to lay off healthcare workers and teachers and firefighters and police. That's what we believe in, and that's what we include in our bill, not in the McConnell bill. Housing, no funding for housing or rental assistance in the McConnell bill that'll be brought before us. Economic stimulus, remember the $1,200 checks? There are no direct stimulus checks in the McConnell proposal. He says that we are holding out to help the coastal elites. Newsflash, Senator McConnell, the coastal elites don't qualify for these checks, nor should they. Ordinary people do, and your bill doesn't help them. On unemployment, Senator McConnell's bill cuts the benefits in half, the federal benefits for unemployment. And then he puts in this provision, incredible provision that gives large companies immunity from liability if they do not take the necessary steps to protect their employees and customers. That's a high priority. The big shots do pretty well in Senator McConnell's bill. When it comes to testing, Senator McConnell's prepared to spend $16 billion, as I mentioned earlier. The bill that we support has over $57 billion for hospitals and healthcare clinics and $75 billion for testing. Nutrition, Senator McConnell says we're just trying to help the blue state billionaires. Well, I've got news for him. They don't qualify for SNAP benefits, and there's no SNAP benefit increase in the McConnell bill. We believe there should be. People are standing in line at food banks. America can do better. Money to help the schools, we put more money into that than Senator McConnell does. Help for the Postal Service, which has been hard pressed by the current state of the economy. We also have Paycheck Protection Program, which we all agree needs to be there for the small businesses. I will just conclude by saying this. We have our chance now to work together on a bipartisan basis to help people who are counting on us. Senator McConnell's approach has to be rejected. It is just an effort to find some cover politically so people can go home and say, well, I voted for something. Let's do something that makes a difference in the lives of people and helps them. Let's deal with this coronavirus directly, and let's help those who are suffering with job loss and struggling to make ends meet get through this crisis themselves. That is a responsibility that we face, and it's one that I think we should face honestly. I listened as my friend and colleague, Senator Thune, came and said that we were holding America hostage with our position on the Democratic side. We're not holding them hostage. It was Senator McConnell who refused to participate in the negotiations and still does. We have an effort, bipartisan effort between the White House and Speaker Pelosi to solve this problem and to come together again as we did in March. It is time for us to do it. The president may say he's tired of COVID, but America can't be tired of COVID. We have to face it every single day and fight it every day. The Senate and Congress should help. I yield the floor.
Senator from Vermont.
President, I concur with everything our distinguished assistant leader has said. President, we're in the middle of the most devastating public health crises in modern history. The American people are paying a terrible price. Nearly 220,000 Americans have died in just 10 months. To put that in perspective, that's significantly more than the number of Americans who died in the Korean, the Vietnam, the Iraq, and the Afghanistan wars combined, all of them. Remember when President Trump called himself a war president? President Trump said he's a war president. Well, has he acted like one? No. He called the virus a hoax. He's been AWOL ever since. Millions have lost their jobs. They're struggling to make ends meet. People are being evicted from their homes. They're living in their cars, in shelters, or on the streets. They're relying on the generosity of others, and the virus is still not remotely under control. The need for another comprehensive emergency funding bill to address the COVID crisis is obvious. It's urgent, has been for 5 months. And what's the Senate doing? Staging show votes on COVID relief bills that the majority leader himself has said will go nowhere. And then they go back on their word, what both the majority leader and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee said a year ago, as they try to rush through the nomination of a Supreme Court justice less than 2 weeks before the election, after millions of Americans have already voted. So what are their priorities? I know where mine are. They're with the families of the 220,000 Americans who've lost their lives to this virus. They're with the thousands of Vermonters, the millions more across our nation who've lost their jobs during this pandemic. They're with the small business owners trying to stay afloat during this crisis. They're with the fathers and mothers who wondering if they'll be able to pay next month's rent or put food on the table. They're with the children struggling to learn through Zoom calls and online classes. So it's a national disaster, and it requires real solutions. We need a comprehensive bill to address this problem. We can't do it with fig leaves or do it piecemeal as Senator McConnell wants to do. We can't pass an inadequate bill today on the chance maybe we'll come back later and do what we should have done to begin with. That's not how it works. Everyone knows that. We have one chance in what remains of this year to get it right. We owe it to the American people, everybody. I don't care whether they're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, to everybody to try. The majority leader staged a show yesterday. He didn't bring up a comprehensive proposal for COVID relief and opening up for debate. He called for a process vote on only one part of it, the Paycheck Protection Program. Well, I support that program. We all do. It's been critical in keeping literally thousands of Vermont small businesses afloat. But take a look at this proposal. It falls flat. It ignores critical improvements of the program that would be made by considering the HEROES Act, expanding access to all nonprofits, making critical access hospitals eligible for PPP, addressing arbitrary caps on various loan programs to help small businesses. More importantly, providing more funding for this program and nothing else wouldn't even remotely solve the problems facing our country. The economy won't come back until the American people have confidence the virus has been vanquished. We need more funding for the PPP program. We all agree on that, but we need to fix that program and do so much more. We have to invest more in testing. It needs to be based on national testing and contact tracing strategy so we can quickly identify cases, isolate those who've been exposed. How many times do we have to say this? We need to develop a vaccine distribution program now so it can be up and running as soon as the vaccine is available. We have to provide personal protective equipment to those on the front lines. We have to ensure our hospitals have their resources they need to take care of the bill. We need to keep our nursing homes safe and virus-free. So if you do just a target bill aimed at one sector, that's the way to avoid doing what's really needed. And it picks winners and losers at a time when everyone is struggling. No matter how much aid we give to small business or to the airlines or to our struggling restaurant industry, our economy doesn't come back till the virus is under control. So we need a comprehensive bill, not the so-called McConnell skinny bill we're voting on today. It's only $500 billion for COVID relief, less than half of even what the Trump administration proposed just a month ago. Look at the lines at food banks. They've skyrocketed during this crisis, but there's nothing in this bill for nutrition assistance. Look at the millions of Americans who are struggling to pay next month's rent or keep up with their mortgage payment. Notwithstanding the wishful thinking of the president, this is a massive problem, and either the president doesn't know it or he doesn't care. Maybe it's both. 25 million Americans on unemployment compared to just 2 million at the end of January. And the unemployment assistance in this bill is totally inadequate. Nothing in the bill for state and local governments who are on the front line fighting this virus. Inadequate money for testing and education, childcare, no funding for community health centers, no funding to fight this on a global level. So we're not going to defeat this pandemic if we ignore what's happening outside the United States. Americans can't safely resume international travel, commerce. I mean, I could go on. There's so much that's missing. And so, but what do they put in? Oh, they turn something over to the well-paid lobbyists of corporations by providing sweeping liability shields for corporate wrongdoers who have failed to do their part to keep employers and consumers and patients safe. That tells you everything you need to know about what's in it. A special earmark for big corporations so they can come ahead of a struggling American family. We know it's not going to pass. It shouldn't pass. Let's start working and getting something that can be passed. As Senator Durbin said, the House passed the HEROES bill over 5 months ago. And they passed it again 3 weeks ago. Well, why don't we take it up, vote it up or vote it down? Let's have some votes. Let's make people stand up and say, what are they really, really for? And if we don't, then democracy has failed, the American people have failed. I see my colleague on the floor, and I didn't realize he was there before, so I will put the rest of my statement on the record and yield the floor.
That objection.
Hey, Mr. President.
The senator from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to finish my comments before the vote.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today again to speak on behalf of the brave and hardworking men and women of law enforcement across this nation. Last month, I talked about the dangerous consequences of inaction by the Senate if we didn't come to protect them. And unfortunately, since my last speech, 4 more law enforcement officers, men and women, have died, been murdered in the line of duty. That's a 20% increase over the same number this time last year. And that doesn't count the hundreds of police officers who have been injured in the line of duty, many of them still recovering from their wounds. The groundswell of violence against law enforcement is shocking. And it's our responsibility as senators to act. Enough is enough. Rather than support radical ideas like defunding and abolishing the police, the Senate should take the lead and pass meaningful legislation to protect law enforcement officers, increasing funding, improving training, and raising standards. That's why I again call on my colleagues to support and pass the Protect and Serve Act, a bill that I've sponsored and a bill that I hope we can get passed. The Protect and Serve Act would punish dangerous criminals who murder a law enforcement officer in the line of duty. If they murder a law enforcement officer in the line of duty, they'll be sentenced to life. If they injure a law enforcement officer in the line of duty, they'll be sentenced to 10 years in prison. The premise of the legislation is simple. There's no escape from justice for dangerous criminals who intentionally assault or kill a law enforcement officer. The Senate passes legislation almost every day in this chamber by unanimous consent. But I'm sad to report that if I tried to get unanimous consent for this bill, that we would have objection on the floor. The heated rhetoric and the violent attacks on officers are having real-world impacts, and the safety of law enforcement has never been at the low that it is today. Across the country, recruitments are down. Fewer people are applying to go into into law enforcement academies, and retirements are up. We're seeing our law enforcement ranks dwindle. It's sad, but it's not surprising. Law enforcement officers put their lives on the line every single day. Every morning they wake up, they kiss their spouse goodbye, and they don't know if they're going to come back safely. But when they spend all day being disrespected, doing this very difficult and very dangerous job, and politicians harass them, or allow them to be harassed, I should say, by violent mobs, protesters, there's no wonder that morale's at an all-time low. Fewer police means more criminal activity. It means hardworking American citizens who are going to work every day just to make their lives better are living in communities that are less safe. We cannot sit idly by and allow for the streets to be filled with dangerous, violent criminals who face no consequences. Instead, we must speak up and show our men and women in blue that we respect them and that we back them. They put their lives on the lives to protect us, and we should do the work in Congress to protect them. In fact, in the last Congress, Speaker Pelosi allowed this bill to be voted on. She supported making it a law. But now, her conference is run by radical leftists who want to abolish the police or defund the police, and she's not even allowing this bill to be brought to the floor. She won't speak in support of law enforcement officers, despite the rising tide of violence against them. That's why the responsibility lies here in the Senate, for us to show our support and let law enforcement communities across the country know that we have their backs. Let's protect police, deputies, and let's pass the Protect and Serve Act. I urge the American people to call your senators and tell them that you want this bill passed. You want law enforcement to be safer, and you want our communities to be safer. Don't be silent. Help me fight for the men and women in blue. They're counting on all of us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the motion to concur in the House amendment to S-178, an act to condemn gross human rights violations, and so forth, with a further amendment, number 2652, signed by 17 senators.
All of two. By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to concur in the House amendment with amendment number 2652 to S-178, an act to condemn gross human rights violations of ethnic Turkic Muslims, the Xinjiang, and calling for an end to arbitrary detention, torture, and harassment of these communities inside and outside?